Hello, everybody, and welcome to Episode 3 of the Between the Lanes podcast, brought to you by BetweenTheLanes.net, your number one source for competitive content on the Elder Scrolls Legends card games. I am your host, CVH, and the owner of Between the Lanes, and I'm with you, as always, with my co-host, EarthP0w3R.
What's going on, guys?
And today we have a special guest, as you can see on screen. Our third person for this podcast is a name you might be familiar with, ThatsAdmirable.
Hello.
So I'm going to just toss it over to you, Admirable, since you are our guest this week. How would you tell the people, if they don't know you from a different card game, what they need to know about ThatsAdmirable?
I come from a Hearthstone background mostly, recently anyway. I transitioned from a pro player to a caster late in 2014. 2015 consisted of mostly casting. 2016 has been a combination of play and casting, mostly focusing on the broadcasting side. I've been playing cards for over 2 decades at this point. It's ranged from, started with Magic, moved into just about every card game you can imagine, including, is it Spell Power, was that awful one? Star Wars TCG. I mean, you basically name a card game and I've probably played it. And I played a lot of video gaming also when I tried to step into some more of a pro gaming thing with like League of Legends, Dota. I tried my hand at Counter-Strike, wasn't really my thing, it was just too hard. But given that my hands were injured when I was younger, it's very difficult to actually play games that require mechanical skill very intensively. So I focused instead on logic and decision-making things, and that took me into full-time poker and eventually buying and selling Magic cards, and now with Hearthstone.
Nice, and even more recently than that, Elder Scrolls Legends. You liking the game so far?
Yes, it's really got a lot of things incorporated from some of my favorite games ever into one nice little package. There's still a few things I think can be improved on, but for the most part, I've been really enjoying the game, and I think it's got a lot of depth to it, and a lot more than people are giving it credit for as well. And it's a different flavor than Hearthstone. And as much as I love steak, occasionally I want chicken.
Fair enough. Personally, I'm a chicken man myself. So, without further ado...
personal trainer in you.
Yeah, it really is. Alright, so, let's jump right into the meat of the podcast. This is a topic that I would have loved to discuss on the last podcast. Yeah, speaking of the meat, right?
Meat puns.
I saw that, Carl. Alright. So, unfortunately, we couldn't discuss this in the last podcast. This was announced like a day or two after I actually posted the last podcast to YouTube. We got some nerfs, and I didn't think we'd be getting more nerfs since they did a lot of nerfs in the closed beta before Carl and I and Admirable were even able to play the game. We're in open beta now, and they did, in fact, give us some all of a sudden, here are 2 cards that are nerfed. And those 2 cards, as you can see on screen, are the new Murkwater Savage and Soul Rest Marshals. So Soul Rest Marshal, of course, reduces the next card by 5 less instead of 6 less, and the big nerf to Murkwater Savage was just increasing its magic cost up to 3 from 2. So these are obviously some pretty insanely important cards in the metagame, very meta-defining for some top-tier decks like the mid-range Archer. And I just basically want to talk about them, in the context of, what do we think? Are these good nerfs? How are they really... How are these defining the new metagame, right? And I'm going to start with EarthP0w3R. What do you think about these nerfs? What are your initial thoughts?
Well, we talked about it last podcast a little bit with Soul Rest Marshal, that it needed to reduce a little bit, I guess, less or than it had been with the Jarl combo that you could get off on turn 4 if you had the Elixir of Magicka, or you could get off on just turn 5, just going first. And that combo alone puts you so far ahead of the rest of like basically every other deck that you were competing against with Archer, because Archer was already really good on its own. And with Jarl and Soul Rest, with that combo that just kind of weaved its way into its Magicka curve, Soul Rest and Jarl just kind of got way too far ahead. So them touching Soul Rest and making that a little bit more difficult to do now, where you now actually have to wait till turn 5 with the Elixir of Magicka, or it becoming a turn 6 combo, kind of set it back a little bit, and I think gave the rest of the decks a little bit more room to catch up and compete with it. The nerf to Murkwater Savage, however, I think messed with Murkwater. It didn't mess with Archer so much. I mean, because a lot of green is still really good, guys, and I know Nathan's going to have a lot to say about that here in a minute. But Murkwater Savage being reduced to a 3-drop made it very, very hard to play now, and it doesn't really fit in so well with the curve, because there's a lot of better, I want to say 3-drops now that, had that spot already niched, and the Murkwater Savage doesn't really have a spot now. It's been replaced with other 2-drops like Cut Purse, Fighter's Good Recruit, the Murkwater Witch, all really good 2-drops that already found its place in Archer, and the other 3-drops like Kinsman, Nimble Ally, which a lot of people are playing, and it just doesn't have a spot anymore. It can't really get out of hand as well as it could on turn 2 or turn 1 even with the Elixir, and I think that's why they nerfed it. And I think they're both fine nerfs. I think, the deck still does what it wants to do. Archer in mind. Green itself took a little bit of a hit because and I'll pass it over to Nathan now to talk about, Green and his idea on the nerfs because I know he's going to run away with it. So.
Yeah, so Green and agility in general, I think, is already too strong. It was way too strong prior to these two changes, and I still think it's the strongest. Something that's really interesting about Soul Rest Marshal is that prior to this change, it actually didn't reduce anything but creatures. And now that it's only reducing by 5, you can actually play spells or items or support cards off of it. So the change it definitely is a nerf because accelerating into a 6-drop before you should be able to play a 6-cost card is definitely more powerful. But it does open up the options to potentially play some funky tempo decks off this. Like something I was testing out when I first started Assassin was if I had the life lead, playing Soul Rest Marshal into Winter's Grasp and seeing if I could just literally snowball the game after that. So that's a really interesting change that I think was necessary to it, and I still think it might be too strong, but time I think will tell more on that than anything else. And Murkwater Savage I'm really disappointed with how they chose to approach this card, because at 2 mana and a 2/2, this card was just way too strong. There was no question about it. My question is, does 3 mana make this card actually a more functional and more balanced card? Because right now it's competing with Kinsman at the 3 slot, which in my opinion is the best 3-cost card in the game. It's also now competing with Varanus Courier, which Varanus Courier is a card that enables a ton of the green decks, given that you have Finish Off and you have Leaf Lurker. You need cards that draw cards, and you need cards that deal damage. So at 3 mana, you no longer have really the option to play Kinsman and to play Varanus Courier and to play Murkwater Savage. You're starting to border on too many 3s. My other issue with it, though, is at 2 mana 2/2, it's way too powerful. Could they have approached this from like a 2 mana 2/1, a 2 mana 1/2, a 2 mana 1/1? Like, where could this have gone to keep it competing at the 2 slot, where I think it's necessary to compete? Because frankly, a lot of the 2s in green do very, very different things, and so having it compete there rather than just doing the same thing that all the 3-drops are doing, really, versus having it at 2 and being a very different kind of 2-drop, I think would have been a lot more interesting. So I think that the change on this was like more of a band-aid than anything else because the card was snowballing so many games. But I think I would have liked to see this start more at like a 2 mana 1/1 than be a 3 mana 2/2.
Well, you guys played Hearthstone. You guys both know what happened to Undertaker, and I think that's the best card to compare this one to. For those of you who do know, Undertaker was a 2 for 1/2, or no, a 1 for 1/2.
No, yeah, it was 1.
That just got out of hand, and I think this card's very, very similar. Like this game mechanic, and CVH mentioned it on stream a couple nights ago, and I'll pass it over to him to kind of say it better than I probably will. But cards like that it's very hard for them to exist in a meta that's very mid-rangey like this.
Yeah, I just think like everything is drifting towards mid-range, and we know that because like we will touch on in the future as well. Green is so prevalent, mid-range is so prevalent because the card pool is small, and one of the most successful strategies is playing the most value cards you possibly can on curve, and mid-range decks typically have a good game plan for the early, mid, and late game. That's why they're so powerful, and dedicated control and dedicated aggro builds I think require more cards to be released, which I guess we'll talk about as well. But Murkwater Savage was one of those cards at 2 for 2/2, just like Undertaker was at 1, but even more so in this game because the context at which you can buff it it's just so easy. You can just, play green cards. You don't even need to build a deck with a lot of Death Rattles or anything, or Last Gasps. So, like, at a 2-drop 2/2, let's say we get, set rotations like 2 years from now or something. Until that point, I don't see any deck with green not wanting to just play 3 of these, and I don't think they want a card like that just limits design space. And there are other very good 2-drops like Fighter's Guild Recruit that it's hard to imagine a deck without them, but they also aren't the kind of cards that just snowball the game away, and that you always have to be thinking about, well, I have to play around this card or it could just kill me for the next, 2 years. So yeah, I think that nerf was important, but probably could have been done a few different ways.
Yeah, I think that's really something important to touch on too. You mentioned Fighter's Guild Recruit and playing a green deck without it, which is that seems insane.
Right.
The card is very, very strong at 2 mana, and if your opponent doesn't have a strong way to combat it, can very easily buy you a significant advantage. Is that where Green's or Agility's identity wants to lie? Is in those very powerful small utility cards, or does it want to rely on something like Murkwater Savage, where you build a giant board presence and swing the game? Because if you look at the 4-cost Goblin, the 4/4 that gives all your Goblins +2/+2, that's trying to accomplish the same thing that Murkwater Savage is, and obviously requires a lot bigger of a setup. But if Green is going to have access to Murkwater Savage and Fighter's Guild Recruit and Thieves Guild draw a card for 2 mana thing, and Varenus Courier, and Finish Off, and Leaf Lurker, and Kinsman, and a 4/3 Prophecy that drains, and Source Marshal, which accelerates you. Like, what's Agility's identity right now?
You forgot Tazcad.
Well, Tazcad's just a good finisher. I think every class should have a good finisher. But the thing I'm trying to really point to here with the Murkwater Savage is I really feel like this nerf is incredibly uninspired and not helping fulfill the role of where Agility's identity is. And that to me, that's the thing that's so uninspired about this nerf and why I don't like it. I do think the card needed to be changed, but I don't like the way that they changed it.
You don't like the Band-Aid approach, yeah.
Right.
It's pretty scary. I'm not convinced this card is like bad or anything. It just so happens the green already has so many good 3-drops that by comparison, you probably don't want to play this over, definitely not over House Kinsman, depending on what meta you're expecting, not over like Black Sap or Nimble Ally in some decks. There's a lot of good 3s in green. But it just seems like they knew they needed to change it. Maybe it was just sort of like a rush thing where, well, we know if we do this to it, it's going to be significantly worse. And I think that, I don't know, it might be fair. I don't know if they probably just could have let it stick around for a little bit longer if they wanted to take more time to test it as a 1/1 or something, or 1/2. I don't know.
To draft off, like, that's Admirable's idea of, like, the identity, though. Like, I get what he's coming from, like, with, blue being a more kind of control-based, they've got a lot of cards that do a lot of the same things. And then, with willpower and endurance, they all have a role that they're playing. Red I can speak to probably the most because I played with it the most, but it's that support role. It's like, they're bouncing things, or, it's a couple of disruption cards, and then everything else is like a buff thing. But like green just has all the tools to just kind of be its own, like to just kind of ignore all the other guys. So it's weird to see. And now that I'm thinking about it, you've got me actively thinking about it now, so I'm still putting thoughts together. But seeing where this, where green's going to fall in the coming months, if they are going to make more changes. Because if they're going to make this snap change on, just us playing, because we don't know who they're talking to. I don't know who Bethesda's talking to. Maybe you guys do, or Direwolf, or whoever. But, I don't know who they're talking to like, kind of gather and say that, hey, Soul Rest needs to reduce by 1, or hey, Murkwater needs to be 3. Where they're getting this information from to make these, what I'm assuming, educated decisions. So if that's going to happen more like a snap decision every, 3 to 4 weeks, I'm wondering what's going to happen next, or if that's going to be a regular thing while we're still in beta.
Well, to be fair, they might have actually, because everyone on like the Direwolf team, like Luis Scott Vargas and Chapin and them, they're all very accomplished card game players. They know how cards typically interact. They might have literally put it through the gauntlet, and we're just theorizing. They might have just said, well, we made Murkwater Savage a 2-drop 1/1. It kept dying to Murkwater Witch. So this seemed like a nerf to make a play. It could just be what they deemed appropriate.
And that would make me feel a lot better if they would, openly say that.
They did openly say why it was nerfed, and none of us can really disagree with its snowball potential. But, just steering, like, compared to all the things they could have done to it, that would be a really cool conversation to have with Direwolf in the future. Worth noting while we're on the topic of nerfs, that they are not even... because we can see it in the Savage change, obviously, when they're making room for their 2-drops, but they are actively considering the room for cards to be introduced in the future, such as Windbone Colossus, which I don't have on screen, but it was changed from buffing all undeads by by +1/+1, to buffing just other skeletons. So what they're doing is splitting up a lot of the endurance purple cards into different little subcategories of races. So we have some skeletons, we have some undead, we have other things. So I think that's kind of cool. I don't know if you guys want to touch on that at all, but I think it's a cool change.
Something I would really like to see this game that Hearthstone really has strayed away from is more aggressive balance changes. With making physical card games, it's hard to take risks on cards, because once they're there, you have to either ban them and say to people, you can no longer use this card, it's worthless. Where in a digital card game, you can very aggressively change things, and if they don't work, you can actually just change them back. And certainly that upsets a lot of people when you make changes so frequently or so aggressively. But that's sort of, to me, the beauty of a digital card game, is that you have the liberty to do that. And with Murkwater Savage going to 3, if they just suddenly find that nobody on the planet's playing Murkwater Savage, go revisit that. And small changes like the Murkwater Savage, like updating a lot of the text that's on cards, changing Soul Rest Marshal by such a nominal amount, like go from 6 to 5. Even at 5, like the first time, if this card was printed at 5 and presented to you, you would have gone, whoa, what? Like, that's not fair. And I think that this is maybe a direction they're willing to go with it, is the more aggressive changes. And that, to me, that sort of just seems like what Bethesda's done in general, is have a lot of support for small little things that make a big impact at the end of the day.
Yeah, I can't really speak to their nerfs in closed beta, but I know a few things have been changed over the course of the few months that the game has actually been able to be played. I do like the direction of these nerfs. I know, like, nerfing things willy-nilly is, bad. You don't need to just nerf, I lost one game to ThatsAdmirable queued into me in casual and beat me with it. You need to make it cost 6 now. So,
I did lose like 15 straight games after we got Sky.
I'm not going to talk about that one. All right, yeah, but I do like the direction the nerfs are being taken. And with that, speaking of nerfs, since you said you're a fan of more aggressive changes, is there... What other card, if you had to pick one other card to look at as a potential thing to be nerfed? I know someone from Direwolf, I can't tell you who, but one of them did say the next card, one of the cards they were looking at the top of their list of, considerations was Brutal Ashlander. What are your thoughts, Admirable? If you could pick one card.
Kinsman, by far. I think Kinsman is too big of a driving force to the game right now, and it's one of the reasons why I think green is so powerful, is if you look at every single attribute, they have a card that rewards you for being ahead on life. It is very hard to get ahead on life if your opponent plays a turn 2 or turn 3 Kinsman. And it's so incredibly powerful that it's like keeping Golden Saint, Royal Sage, not Jarl because it's kind of an enabler for Jarl, but it's keeping the rest of them at bay. And that's a problem because those cards are meant to be able to snowball stuff. How on earth do you get ahead of a Kinsman if they play it on turn 3? It's just they
gotta play your own Kinsman.
Yeah, really easy to do, right? You just crushing blow it and take 3 and they gain 3. It's a 6 health life swing, plus you invested an equal amount of mana and cards in answering it. Like, that's just not a fair card if you're going to have cards that reward people for having more life than their opponent in such an aggressive manner.
Do you think the argument could be made that as the card pool expands, I know we're probably not getting an expansion for a good few months at this point, but could you make the argument that as the card pool expands, and they more than likely won't give us more cycles of these ahead on life crazy cards like Soul Rest and Golden Saint, that Kinsman gets less important as cards begin to contest for the spots that things like Soul Rest and Golden Saint are taking? Or do you think it'll still be just too good? It's obviously fine by itself.
It's really hard to envision a world where a 3-mana 3/3 that when it dies deals your opponent 3 damage and gains 3 life is not a staple of the game.
Makes sense.
I mean, unless the game turns into like a combo-oriented thing, or like just hyper-control-oriented where Kinsman's actually at one of its best versus control. I really cannot see Kinsman being like put aside unless there's just massively powerful tools that answer that card in a favorable way.
Yeah, because right now you either have to let it hit you a few times and you're taking 3 every turn and play in the other lane, or you play it in that lane, you probably take an even trade, and then, the life disparity puts you super far behind if they have any of the cards that take advantage. So, moving on to EarthP0w3R, what do you think? If you could tell them to look at one card for a potential nerf, would it be Ashlander, Kinsman, or something else?
One card. I'm on
if
the
you
same...
have 2 really good ones, then you can...
Well, I'm on the page with Admirable about Kinsman. I think doing something there is important. I think because we brought it up last night, and it just made me think. Like, I went to bed thinking about a lot of this stuff after I passed out on the couch. But I woke up and then thought about the game. But like, people managing their life totals is not something I think a vast majority of players are doing. You brought it up last night, Nathan. That it's like, people aren't just swinging for those extra points of damage. They're not realizing how pivotal getting ahead in life, or just making those swings while you have the opportunity to make those swings are. And Kinsman being able to make that vast difference on turn 3 or 4, or using it later in the game to just kind of push for that extra reach that you need to win the game is humongous. And I think. And in my mind, one of the ways to probably fix that is kind of like the Ashlander fix that I proposed in the last podcast. It's like a 1-for-1/1 that deals 2 randomly instead of 3, because 3 is a lot. Like, at the end of the day, 3 is a lot of damage. And Kinsman could probably come from the same thing, just doing 2 to the face and maybe healing for 2. It makes it not as great, but still a good card that I think everyone would still play. But less impactful, obviously. But one of the cards I think that needs to be looked at is, this is maybe all-encompassing, but a lot of the Prophecy creatures that are so easy to play on curve, and green's got 2 really good ones in Fighter's Guild Recruit and the Werebat. Both cards very, very strong on curve. You want to probably be playing them on 2 or 4, depending on the situations, but Them also being able to be played for free from your deck if they just hit a rune randomly seems way overpowered for cards like that. And from past experience with card games that have free-to-play creatures, the impact of those creatures was less because those cards cost a lot more to get their effect. The cost of, for Kaijudo's instance, the cost for a shield blast creature was like 3 or 4 over what the normal cost for that creature would be. If there was a 3 cost, card that said bounce a card to the hand, you would tack on an extra 3 mana and make it a 6 drop for 1,000 power creature, out of hand if you were to play it for free.
Way overcosted, yeah.
Yeah, so they would overcost it a lot, and that made those cards balanced in a way. Some people still ran them because they were pivotal to what the deck was trying to do, but they weren't overplayed to where every deck just snap played 3 of them in whatever, color they were in. So
yeah, and some of them are overcosted. We look at a card like Dark Harvester, for example, which costs 7 in this game, 7 Magicka, and you say, all right, well, I probably, I think that's like an extreme case. They obviously overcosted that more than they would do any other cards because it's neutral and they can't have everyone like snap played in 3 of Prophecy. Same with Portcullis, right? But on the whole, you look at Werebat, it's barely overcosted. If it was a 3
if
drop,
it's even overcosted.
If it is, right? Like they're not going to make a 3-drop 3/4 drain without Prophecy. More than likely, they could, but pushing it to 4 is totally fine.
Yeah, I think something has to be done either to the power or the cost of certain prophecies like that. Otherwise, prophecy creatures just become the snap 3-ofs in whatever color you're playing, and like you said earlier, that limits design space. That's 3 copies that you're running every time, no matter what color you're in.
And some of them I think are fine. Like they did a good job on House Carl. I think that's one of them. A few of the names escape me, but. Yeah.
The thing that's something really interesting to note too is kind of touching more on the green is way too good train that I'm on right now. Is if you look at all the prophecy cards in the game, there's like a couple of standouts that really come to mind. Number 1 is Lightning Bolt. I think at 4 mana for 4 damage, it's pretty reasonable, but hitting it off prophecy is obviously very powerful. Werebat comes to mind as a 4 mana 4/3, which is just way too good. Daring Cutburst, 2 mana 2/2 that also has prophecy. Like sometimes you're just getting these cards for free.
It's so easy to forget that's a prophecy.
But look at every other prophecy. Javelin's 5, Fate Weaver 6, Loyal House Carl's 5. Like every single prophecy in the game, I'll make an exception for Shrieking Harpy because I don't think that card's that very good off prophecy. Almost every single prophecy in the game is overcosted, except for the green ones.
Yeah.
Why? They've seen exactly what you guys are talking about, where prophecy cards should cost more. If you have a card that is a high risk, high reward card that you can play for free sometimes, but you can also just play it, it's a reasonable card, why aren't they overcosted?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the things that attracted me to green from the beginning is I want to be playing the top tier things. I want to be playing and winning. And so naturally you fall to green because that's what everyone's winning with. And we look at it, we dive in, and we find out that it's the Werebat, it's the Cut Purse, it's the Fighter's Guild Recruit, it's the House Kinsman, it was the Savage, it's the Soul Rest, all these very, very powerful cards. And looking at the other colors, they just don't have as many impactful cards. They've got cards that can support the green cards, but it's like you're always wanting to be in this color because those are just all really, really good cards.
I think it does, green is getting really rewarded for where the meta is right now, which is very mid-range friendly. Like, if you're playing an aggressive deck, or a deck that wants to curve out by, turn 6 through 8, green is the color for you, basically, because it has all the best, cards on curve. And I think that's probably why they said to themselves, oh, we can make Black Side Protector and House Kinsman and, the 4/3 Drain Werebat cost what they do, is because, well, green's just supposed to have some of the best things you can play on curve. I'm hoping what needs to happen isn't like a mass rework, except maybe we just get cards in the future that really push strong dedicated control decks, strong dedicated aggro decks, and then we care less about House Kinsman or something, just being possibly the best value 3-drop. I'm hoping that's the case. Right now it's I can't really describe it in a Hearthstone term, but it's like if the meta was just so incredibly druid friendly and I don't know, green is druid, something like that. It's just, I just want to play my Druid of the Claw, my Keeper of the Grove before the nerf. Everything is so value. There's no reason, nothing punishing me for it.
And part of me just fears the power creep at that point. I'm sure they'll do a fine job of handling it. It seems like they're very invested in this game and figuring out, what they need to do to make sure that all the players are happy. But it's power creep is always a scary thing for me in any card game. I've played too many of them that have just gotten way too far out of hand, and I've either fall off or I stopped playing them because of it. So it's just an interesting thing to note, I guess.
I would like to just make a bold prediction that when they announce set rotations 1.5 years to 2 years from now, we'll be here for you on this podcast to tell you why it's okay.
I mean, power creep is an interesting thing because it's kind of an ebb and flow, right? I mean, you have to have cards step up the game at some point, or things just get boring. The new cards you create get outclassed. People aren't happy with it. Your monetizing system goes downhill. Like, there's a lot of snowball effects that come in when you release bad cards. So power creep is really like a big ebb and flow where it has to fluctuate. There's not really any way around that to have a monetizable system if you're just going to create cards that are balanced through and through and not have any sort of set rotation. It makes it to where the game grows stagnant. People don't like it anymore. You keep seeing people play, I hate to keep making this reference, but you hate to keep people playing Kinsman on turn 3 every single time. Or just plug in whatever card it may be. I mean, you picture if your opponents literally every single time had an Ice Storm Control Mage deck because it was just the best. Like, you would just hate playing against Ice Storm eventually. Or just any of the cards in the deck for that matter. And so in order to keep that balance going, you have to have some sort of power creep, but you do have to find a way to pull that in as well. And I think that's where the aggressive changes to cards can totally work fine. Like, if you want to release a card because it's a new interesting thing, but a card in the current set really keeps that under control or out of control, just change the cards in the current set, let the new card come out, have people have their fun with it. Maybe you adjust them back the other way eventually. I personally think that people like changes. They like them a lot. And if you look at games that do very aggressively change, like League of Legends, for instance, one of the most popular video games in the world, they very aggressively change things. They'll release patches prior to Worlds, and professional teams have to recreate a new strategy in weeks. They're competing for literally millions of dollars. And fans love that stuff. It's very apparent that people love League of Legends. The aggressive changes are totally okay. You just have to find the right way to do them. And in power creep, again, that's another way to keep power creep under control, is to do those aggressive changes over and over again. But I do think something's got to give right now because at the state the game's going, people are just going to find ways to tempo better and better, or people are going to find combo decks, and then eventually all this stuff we know right now is going to be out the window.
Right. Well, to mention from the past couple podcasts, we've said it in each one of them. The game's still a month and a couple days old at this point out of beta, or at least in open beta. So we've already seen a lot of evolution in this month. People have ventured on from Archer, and now with the changes, they're given more of a reason to do so. But I think the game is still growing. There's still a lot that I guarantee we haven't stumbled on. So it's interesting to note that we're still in beta, guys. It's not the end of the road yet. So
Indeed. So going off of the color wheel that you can see in front of you, the 5 attributes that make up the classes of our decks in the Elder Scrolls Legends, since we pretty much discovered that green is the most powerful objectively, and maybe even mentioned it, just if it hasn't been driven home enough, guys, then you guys should just know agility is very powerful. But what can Bethesda and Direwolf give to us that would sort of make the gap a little bit less severe? Like, to strength and intelligence, willpower, endurance, what do these colors need? What would be something that you would like to see given to any of these colors, really, that you think is currently seriously lacking and making it less playable than perhaps it should be? Admirable
Carl, you want
first.
to... Okay, I'll start this one.
I heard you talking.
Yeah,
I was like...
so I'll kind of go from the top. Again, if you look at identities of colors or attributes for that matter, you have to really think about what are you trying to capture with this. And with strength, some of the cards that really speak to me the most is like Blood Dragon, for instance. Blood Dragon really speaks a lot about where red is. It wants strength, it wants to be unstoppable, and that's where it should lie. Not necessarily just in these giant cards that deal massive amounts of damage, but in cards that are very difficult to impose. And so cards like Mage Slayer and Blood Dragon really stand out to me where strength lies. And then if you look at the rest of it, like Withered Hand Cultist, another very powerful card, it's kind of doing the same thing. It's kind of imposing its will on you, but in a very reasonable way. The rest of the red cards that really do stuff are frankly kind of bad. And something that is really interesting to note is that part of Strength's identity is just using lots of items. And so you have the the 2/2 Horse Rider that when you put an item on him, he gets +3/+0 and Breakthrough. It's kind of imposing its will on you, but that's just a really bad card. It's so easy to kill, and you have to invest 2 cards into it to hope to get an average of about 3.5 damage per card. It's not doing anything. Like, I feel like it's so scattered where strength lies that it needs to be more focused on cards that are kind of imposing its will. Intelligence is the next one I want to visit, and I think Intelligence is in a really good spot. It's a lot about manipulation. It's a lot about having very powerful cards that can answer things. It's a lot about having extra resources available to you, and that's kind of what Intelligence is. You're smarter than your opponent, and you try to figure out how to use your tools better than them. Willpower, I think, again, has a very strong identity right now, where it's trying to have strength in numbers, where you rally the troops and they all work together. And that's spoken in Divine Favor, with Bruma, with Imperial Recruits, the Hive Minder, the 3/6 guard guy. That guy's a little bit weird. I don't really understand it. But everything else is kind of speaking where willpower is. It's strength in numbers, and then eventually, if your numbers are strong enough, you get to very powerful things at the end, like Manticora. Agility is all over the place. Like, it just actually does everything. I'm not even going to talk about agility because they have everything at their disposal that every single other class has right now. And endurance, I feel like, is just a little bit lacking in terms of where the strength in its identity lies. Obviously, with the Hist magic being able to ramp into more powerful stuff at the end of the game, it's more of a patience thing. So I think they're on the right track with endurance, but I'd like to see some more support behind that because, frankly, I just think it's a little bit weak. And it may just be that agility is so strong that it's keeping endurance at bay. Because if you look at a lot of the endurance cards, they get snowballed super hard by agility. But that's kind of where I am in terms of attributes and where I think they need to go.
Yeah, that is a good point, though, that sometimes the soul of a card or even an attribute like we're talking about with endurance can be perfectly intact. They're doing a great job with card design, but sometimes things are just weaker than other things. We have 5 colors here. Games like Hearthstone have 9 classes. Every game sort of has an equivalent. Magic, you can see some of the colors behind Admirable's head. Sometimes one is just weaker than another one, and occasionally it's going to take, a new cycle of cards to be introduced for that to really see meaningful change. As long as everything's playable to a degree, I think we're in a decent spot. And I do agree that, for the most part, I'm pretty happy. I know you really want, like, a 1-drop for red, though. That's one thing.
I just like to see more utility involved with every single attribute. Like, I think every single attribute should have a 1-cost utility card available to them. And what it does, I'm not a designer. I'm a kind of like a consultant style guy, I guess. Red has no utility 1-drop outside of Relentless Raider, which is only doing one thing, and that's dealing damage. And all the best cards in the game happen to kill it. So it's just really in a weak spot. I want cards that people can actually get value from. And I feel like
good about playing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And Brutal Ashlander gets value, but it doesn't feel good playing against it. Like Ungolem, I think Ungolem's fine to play against. Like, it's a 1-mana 2/1. Sometimes your opponent sees benefit from it, sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they really do.
Yeah, sometimes they really do. CVH on their way to number 1 is they just draw all 3 of their assassins on turn 4.
Oh, yeah.
But kind of the point being is that I think every single attribute should have access to some sort of utility so that they can combat on turn 1. And Willpower kind of does with scouting troops. I think that's a totally reasonable card. But like Intelligence, the Brutal Ashlander feels super bad. Endurance, the 1-drops are just abysmal because your opponent splits the lane against you when you play them. So I guess there is some benefit to knowing that your opponent is likely to attack the separate lane. But Strength just has nothing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it has a 1 damage card, it has Rapid Shot. They're totally fine cards, but they're not 1-cost. They're not 1-drops. They are 1-cost utility cards, not 1-drops.
Sometimes you just have to, open with a Sharpshooter Scout to the face to assert your dominance on turn 1.
I would be lying if I said I hadn't done it.
Oh, yeah. I think we all have. We're not really proud of it. But I'm kind of proud, though. All right, so Carl, on to you. Anything specifically you'd like to see for any of these attributes?
Yeah, just to add on to a lot of what Admirable said, I think, Intelligence and Willpower kind of have what they're doing in check, green being all over the place like we've thoroughly discussed. What I'd like to see is more from Endurance. However, like, a lot of their cards are really beefy. That's what attracted me to the Warrior deck almost a month ago when I entered that Discord tournament. I was like, Mammoth seems really good. It's just a 3 for 4/4. And then, you have Stone Tooth Scrapper. We all like Yeti and Hearthstone. Just a 4 for 4/5. It's big. It's difficult to deal with. It's probably going to take 2 cards with it. So I was really attracted to all these cards, and I thought that's kind of what Endurance was trying to do, because then you have like Shadowfin, that's a 5 for 4/4. It's a hefty creature that has a really good effect. And then you've got cards like Bone Colossus, you've got cards like Nagaleave, which are all just big, big on curve. And that's what I liked a lot about it. They were all very durable cards, to put it in a word. So I really like that about the class, and I'd like to see maybe more from that, something taking advantage from them, because that's really all I've got so far. It's just, a lot of just big, beefy cards, and then, like Nathan said, they're one-drops, that are just kind of forcing the opponent to split the lanes. But I think where we need to focus on more is red or strength. It's playing purely a support role for me right now, and I think that's a lot of players, is that it's not really, it's weaving its way into what the other colors are trying to do, and being, providing the Blood Dragon on 5 to help support a curve that can curve out at 5, or Belligerent Giant, which can curve to 7 and then drop the big guy and hit him for a lot. But other than that, I don't really see much coming out of red. All the other cards of support, Earthbone, Skaven, Withered Hand Cultist, all these cards are really good on their own, but they're not contributing to what red's trying to do, it seems. You could put all those cards in a deck, but then where do you fill out, what are the rest of the red cards that are supporting this? No, there aren't any. You're putting them into green to help support, the green curve that's, getting it over on your opponent, or putting them into Crusader, which is, just trying to go face. So I don't know what red's really trying to do, similar to Admirable. I don't know. But it does have some really good cards, and I'd like to see more support, I guess, come out of that. What's the class? Orcs. Orcs is like the only deck I think that really takes advantage of what red's trying to do, because it's got a lot of, I guess, support cards that beef up the other creatures by +1, +2, however many. It's got a lot of those cards that kind of do that and kind of synergize off of each other. The Grotworth legendary, and then the other 5-drop that pulls one back from the graveyard. Those cards are cool, and it's cool that it kind of interacts with Endurance too. It's kind of like, is that where red is though? Is it just the Orcs? Is that all it's got going for it, or is there more, or what could there be more if they add anything to it later on down the road? But I don't know what red's trying to do other than get in there and help out the other guys.
I think at the moment what they're trying to do is just to make it like the clearly aggressive color. But like cards like Fire Em's about as close as we have to utility.
But I
the only
don't
utility
think
is
it's
just going
clearly
face.
aggressive. So that's the thing. Like, it doesn't shout clearly aggressive. Red shouts clearly aggressive because I played a lot of other games where red is the aggressor.
If I'm playing red in your warrior deck, for example, then you have like the support cards. But in a deck where like most of your cards are red, that's like almost always just going to be aggressive. Like, you can even build a control deck. We saw Double O's with his Crusader control, but I think the deck that most screams strength to me, like you're running the most strength cards, probably like the Battle Mage or the Crusader, where you're just like piling on the weapons, like Admirable said, to these kind of crummy 2-drops. But like, you're playing all these aggressive 2s, and it's just not quite there yet for whatever reason. It's just, we're not in a place that fully supports.
Because you're reliant on weapons, is why. Which is why strength is a ridiculous identity. I mean, what's preventing a guy with agility from wielding a dagger?
Yep.
Nothing. A guy with intelligence makes a steel dagger, which is, granted, that's a flavor to the game. Conjurers made weapons. That's totally fine. But again, I feel like the two red cards that really have spoken to me the most in Elder Scrolls Legends are the Withered Hand Cultist, Mage Slayer. I'm sorry, I guess 3 cards: Mage Slayer, Withered Hand Cultist, and Blood Dragon. All 3 of those cards impose something on your opponent that no other cards in the game do, and that is wonderful characteristic design. So how do you capture that with other cards outside of just literally brute force? Because brute force isn't necessarily strength. Sometimes strength is patience. Sometimes strength is endurance. Strength is really involved in every single one of these, which is why all the attributes, you can combine any 2 of them together. That's kind of just how the focus works. But strength is about imposing will. It's very tough to stop something that's very strong unless you can maneuver around it. And that is why I feel like strength is just in a bad spot. Its cards are scattered, and none of them are very focused. I'm in agreement with Carl on this one. I think, for the most part, strength is a support role, which is incredibly surprising to me, because the nature of strength is that it's a driving force.
Makes sense. Do you think it could potentially live up to its characteristics? I don't know. Like, what do we really want, though, for the color? Like, if they were releasing an expansion next week, for example, what kind of card do we want to see? Is there any specific direction we want it to go?
I've been around card design, but I can't really speak to, like, I can't just mouth off a card right now that would be perfect to support, what Strength is trying to do. And I say support, I've said that word too many times already, but, we need cards that help get cards like Blood Dragon, like Withered Hand Cultist, like Mage Slayer. We need cards that help them kind of find their way into being, when people play those cards, it's like, oh, they're playing the red deck, they're, this is what red's trying to do. There's support cards that are going in to help keep Mage Slayer doing what it's doing, help keep, Withered Hand Cultist doing what it's doing, with those cards having their own roles, obviously, too. It's tough to speak to it unless, I don't know if you have any, thoughts on what cards you would make to help support, but...
I mean, I could definitely see some strength cards that are more like punishing effects. Like something that comes to mind is a card from Magic called Eidolon of the Great Revel, I believe it is. It's a 2-mana 2/2 in red that says when your opponent plays a spell that costs 3 or when any player for that matter plays a spell that costs 3 or less, that player takes 2 damage. It's a card that is not in main decks of basically any Magic decks, but it's in a ton of sideboards of them because it keeps decks that just spam cheap spells at bay. And punishing effects like that, to me, make a lot of sense. Like, I'd love to see strength creatures that give a benefit to you when your opponent has more creatures in the same lane than you have. Like, to me, that's like what about strength is it's time to prove yourself. Like,
they have that in willpower at the moment with the Snow Wolf, right?
Exactly. That's kind of the opposite. That's the strength in numbers, where the strength part of it is it's time to prove how strong you are. Mm-hmm. And so things that are punishing effects, I think, could really fit where strength's flavor is, and could help it a lot because it's missing a lot right now.
Yeah, it's fair to think, because I guess Stone's Throw is one thing that's trying to do that. You just made me think of that one. But, how do you build on that?
Yeah, Stone Throw at 3 mana I think is just a little high, is all. Yeah. I mean, at 2 mana it's probably too low, but that's a really hard card to really balance. I think it's probably in a good spot right now, but there's not the support necessary for it.
Yeah, I would play that card in a lot of red decks that don't exist yet, but when they start existing, Stone Throw, I don't think it's getting any worse anytime soon. Seems like a great card. What was I going to say based on that? Yeah, the one punishing effect that really seems to exist is Burn and Pillage. Like, it's not probably in the way you're thinking of, but like, if you're getting aggressive and your opponent's thinking, alright, I'm not going to respect his aggression, I can just stabilize later. They let you break too many runes, and you can punish them by literally burning their entire side of the board to the ground. So
I think Burn and Pillage is in a good spot. I mean, I will admit that. The card design, I think, fits exactly what Strength is trying to do, which is it's shown how strong it is, and now you're getting punished. And I think that's totally fine. I don't think you need another card quite like that. Mm-hmm. I will say I do think Rift and Pillage is pretty good, but I think more punishing effects is right up the alley for Strength. Because currently nothing has a Punisher.
Do you guys think that the lack of prophecies in Red has something to do with it?
Definitely. I mean, the prophecies are like the best prophecy anyway feels like kind of off base, like with Cast Out. Just doesn't really feel like it makes sense. Like Cast Out to me feels like an intelligence card.
Yeah. That seems right, but
yeah,
it's not.
We've been there, yeah.
We can't just move it over. We gotta replace it. What's a good red prophecy? Let's build a red prophecy from scratch right now. Let's do it.
Man. Well, you give it prophecy.
Okay, it's a really good start. Is it a creature or an action?
I mean, I imagine it has to be a creature.
All right, I think probably the best creature prophecy in red.
What about like this? What about like an item? An item that you can play as a creature or an item. So you can either buff something else to make it bigger, or you can have it stand alone to be its own thing.
This is card design that I'm actually almost afraid to like expand upon, because if they hear us, they won't be able to do it. Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet though, right?
Yeah, it could be. And I kind of liked what Admirable was getting at with the Magic card, the 2 for 2/2. Creating something like that maybe has a Stone's Throw effect kind of built into it. Instead of something that just deals 2 to the face. It's for them doing something. It's like a prophecy that maybe is like a 4 for 3/2 or I'm just trying to be balanced here, but it could just be a 3 for 3/2 that you summon and destroy something with less attack than it. So, it could be something cute like that. I think that's, something that I guess Strength's trying to get at.
Oh my gosh. That just gave me like the greatest design, which is like a great Strength card where you equip it to a creature and then it just literally destroys a random enemy creature that has less power than the thing you just equipped. Like, to me, that's a good punishing strength card. If your opponent has one thing and you make yours bigger, you get to blow up their thing. They have to kill your stuff. Like, that now you've created an objective in the game, and I don't know what that card would cost or how much it would buff your creature by. If maybe it doesn't buff it at all, which case just be Stone Throw. But something that can absolutely punish someone for not keeping something in check. Because everything except endurance has that. Everything except strength and endurance really has that.
Yeah. And a really good item like that would even make some of the things that look subpar now that interact with items, like, I'm not saying the Horseman, but like cards like that, they get more playable, then all of a sudden the class, or the attribute looks like it's in a much better spot, right?
Because we've got the opposite of Horseman, too, that just is the, what is it,
guard,
3 for 3 that gives itself +6 in guard when you equipped it with a weapon. It's like, that's what it again, doesn't feel like a strength card to me necessarily, but, I don't know.
Hey, I mean, if you play both of them in the same deck,
yeah,
they work completely the opposite of each other, and therefore you have a lot of synergy. One of them is very defensive, one of them is very offensive. That makes sense, right? Right?
I like it.
No, that's awful. You can never put those two in the same deck, really.
The one is supposed to protect the 2-drop, and you just have all the items because you drew perfectly, Admirable.
4 cards.
Yep, that's your entire hand.
There are 4-card combos that will literally just kill you. Red has a 4-card combo that can maybe protect a 7-2 breakthrough. Yeah.
I would just like to use my 4 cards and about 10 to 12 Magicka to make a 6-2 that will then get firebolted. That's the game plan I'm playing.
Sounds wonderful. Go all in and hope they don't have it.
Yep. That kind of is what red feels like when you're playing like super aggressive.
Anything that deals 2 or greater damage.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. So attributes. That pretty much sums it up. So hand in hand with the attributes and the classes they create is the metagame, and as usual, I'd like to touch on meta developments. What are we seeing on the ladder? Have we noticed any trends, specifically after the nerfs to these fine cards, Murkwater, Savage, and Saurus Marshal? What's the meta looking like? Let's start with Carl, since I let Admirable start like 2 times now. Have you played a lot of ladder? What you been seeing? How's it looking?
Yeah. I'm seeing still the same amount of Archer. That's just one deck that I just keep running into. I think people, even after the nerfs, I think a lot of people wanted to hold on to their Archer, so they started making different changes to it. And I was still seeing the same list. Like, I wasn't seeing any changes. Like, they were just perfectly fine playing a 3 mana or 3 Magicka, Murkwater Savage, and Soul Rest is still doing what it's doing, which is fine. But I'm still seeing a lot of Archer. Spell Sword, I'm seeing a lot less for some reason. I still don't think the deck's that well positioned against decks like Archer, decks like the Control Mage. But it's a lot of Archer and it's a lot of Control Mage. That's what I'm running into a lot of. And ever since you started playing the Assassin that Corey G gave you 3 or 4 days ago, I've been running into that more often than not. So.
That must be a lot of fun. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's those 3 that I'm seeing a lot of. Mage probably more than the other 2.
Interesting. Admirable thoughts?
I've been mostly watching. I haven't really played too much ladder, to be perfectly honest. I don't feel comfortable in any of the builds I have right now.
He's camping top 10 guys.
Look, I would play as soon as I had a strong list, but I don't feel like any of them are strong enough. I tried the Savage at 3. I was like, wow, this is just awful. I played against Savage a lot at 3. I don't know how many people have even realized it changed.
That's totally fair.
Like Control Mage, it just feels like everyone is playing Control Mage, and I have an incredible win rate against that deck, and that may just be like a style thing where I always try to apply pressure and always try to keep my opponent in a bad spot. And when I watch people play against Control Mage and their opponent, they get off to a great start, they attack their opponent 21, and then they have a 2-power guy and they pass. And I'm like, well, I mean, you're not going to win doing that, that's for sure. Like, the Mage probably has enough options as it is. You need to try to kill them. And most of the time I watch people play against Control Mage, they just don't try to kill them. And so, of course, they get to the late game, they stabilize at 6 or 7 life, and then kill you with other super powerful cards. That's kind of why you have to attack them. Like, you have to give them options and hope that the options that they have aren't enough to stop an assault or enough to survive your burst. And every single time you don't attack them, you give them that much more life. So I think Control Mage, honestly, one of the reasons it's so strong is because it's very punishing to players who make mistakes. It is incredibly punishing to them. And a lot of people just, frankly, make a lot of mistakes. Their decks are very unrefined. They're not playing strong enough to a curve. They're not trying to deal enough damage. You will get punished by prophecies. That is a normal part of the game. But you have to try to kill them. You cannot wait and try to outlast a control mage. That's just not the nature of their cards. They have Odaving, they have Dragon Priest, they have Manticore, they have Dawn's Wrath. Like, where is the late game for you unless you have a deck equipped to also play the late game? Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons why Control Mage is so incredibly strong right now, is because the way that people are playing against it isn't working right now, and people have to find a way to combat that strategy. And I can promise you, it's not because of the cards, because there are plenty of ways to get ahead of Control Mage and stay ahead. And Golden Saint is a really easy one. Like, every single mage I've played against has really struggled with Golden Saint. But if you don't attack your opponent, Golden Saint's not very active. And not only that, but then the 8 damage doesn't become as punishing because maybe you missed 2 or 4 damage because you forgot to proc a prophecy. Like, you have to be aggressive versus Control Mage.
Makes sense. Yeah, I personally, and this is a good point brought up in the chat actually, was that, a lot of people literally have just gotten into the game in the recent weeks, don't necessarily have full collections yet, didn't spend a whole lot of money. Archer was probably the most obvious deck to begin crafting. Not only was it not super expensive, but it was obviously super powerful before the nerfs. No one can really argue about that. So people crafted it, nerfs happened, either they weren't fully aware that the nerfs happened, or they simply said to themselves, well, I crafted this deck, and it's basically all I have that was nearing tier 1 territory, so I'm just going to keep jamming it. I don't really know how to change it, so that might be a lot of the reason why we're seeing a good amount of Archer. Personally, I've seen a lot less of it. I have been able to maintain top 50 all month, and the matchmaking got a lot better after the nerfs. I just want to touch on that. Like, the queue times may be a little bit longer, but I'm perfectly okay with that. I was like, I'll take the longer queue times. So I'm queuing against people who are basically always top 200 or so, and very few Archers, maybe 1 or 2. Like Admirable said, tons of Control Mages, lots of Scout Ramp. That's a thing.
Yeah.
A lot of mages, yeah. I've actually seen a lot of
Thinking
ramp.
about it now. Yeah, I've seen a handful. Not enough to be notable yet, but
Yeah.
I have seen a few.
Still almost no dedicated aggro strategies. I played against maybe 1 or 2 in like the last week total that were really trying to hit my face with a wild abandon. Some Assassin recently, but yeah, a lot of Control, a lot of Ramp, much less Archer, much less tokens, as Carl said. And that's pretty much been the meta for me. I don't know. I feel like Archer needs to be refined. I feel like people just haven't really taken enough time, or just stepped out of the ordinary quite enough. I do think Archer is still perfectly reasonable. I just personally haven't been able to test it a whole lot. Yeah. Anything new that we've got brewing that we want to share that might be a contender?
I totally agree with you on refinement too. I think back to the early days of Hearthstone when people just played, in hindsight, like some of the most god-awful builds you had ever seen. Like, we used to not play Force of Nature Savage Roar and Druid, if you can imagine a world where that happened.
I remember doing that.
And Miracle Rogue and Control Warrior were 2 very strong decks. It's just people hadn't found a way to use those cards in conjunction with each other very strong. I even think to now where people are playing Wild Pyromancer, Commanding Shout, Battle Rage, and that just wasn't a thing until recently. How long was that slept on for? Sure, Blood to Ichor gave it a lot of power, but it took someone to refine that process, and there's a lot more people working on Hearthstone than there is working on Elder Scrolls Legends. Mm-hmm. So that's something to really take into consideration, is how strong are the decks we're actually building. I talk a lot about agility being overpowered. Has no one else just really come up with a strong attack plan or counter attack plan to how good agility cards are? Again, I see so many people complain about Control Mage, but every single time that I see Control Mages just get attacked a lot, they die. They have a lot of 7+ cost cards in their deck. Like, sometimes they just draw those off their runes, and they don't have anything to actually play. Keeping those decks honest and forcing them to play lower costed cards is where other control decks can start to scale. And I think that you've seen a lot of mage decks even do that recently, where they play a lot more early game dedicated stuff, and as a result of it, Scout has started to kind of creep up again, where Scout has some very powerful stuff in the late game, but it can't afford to run too many of them. So when you're playing against a mage that can't afford to run Dragon Priest, Marak, Odaving, 3 Manticoras, 2 Dawn's Wrath, and also Supreme Atromancer, and then also Divine Fear if they want.
Stop reading my deck list.
Suddenly, Scout becomes pretty good, because Iron Atronach is a card that is troublesome for your opponent to deal with, that they can't just Mirak it. And if you attack control mages enough, eventually they cut Mirak, because they just look at your board on turn 11 and all you have is 4/4s or 3/2s or whatever it's going to be. Like they have to kill these cards eventually. And that's what keeps them honest. Like, that's just a metagame rotation thing that's going to happen. So refinement for decks, I feel like, is way off. You know, I put a lot when I was playing Archer a lot. I put a solid week into that, and not that like a week's a ton, but I was playing probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 hours a day, and I really put a ton of work into figuring out that Burn and Pillage was a way to beat a lot of decks that I was having trouble with. And that sculpted a lot of the cards I ended up putting in there at the end, and it sculpted the way that I was playing the game as well. And it wasn't really a surprise to me afterwards that I hit number 1, because I was playing much more aggressively than people, and I had cards that could punish people for not playing aggressively versus me. And since then, I've been noticing a lot of people are just attacking my face a lot more, because they're starting to figure it out. If you kill your opponent, you blow up all the cards in their deck, their hand, and on the board at once. And that's a very powerful thing, figuring out how to kill your opponent.
Yeah, I literally tested that card accidentally. I was like, this seems like it could be pretty good in this deck. I'm just going to play it. It turns out it worked. I'm glad you did the legwork for me, Admirable. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's admirable.
That must have been a tough pun for you to come up with there.
Yeah. I heard it as I was like, oh, I'm actually going to say it. This is awful. All right, so with that being said, since we're on the metagame topic, and that's pretty much where I usually like to close, I'm going to turn things over to the chat. You guys have control. Let me know if you want anything answered, any sort of discussions discussed. I already have a few questions that I'm going to talk about currently. Swag HD, I want to touch on this definitely, especially for Admirable. How good is the Scout deck? Why don't people play it more?
Well, the first thing to me is, I think, how good is the Scout deck? I think the current versions out there are pretty abysmal, honestly. I feel like they're really unrefined. Nobody knows exactly where to put the tools or what tools they need to dedicate for, and it struggles a lot versus Control Mage every single time I watch it. So how powerful is it? Probably not right now, but there's a lot of tools there that historically are incredibly strong in card games. And to me, the biggest one is mana ramping. Mana ramping is incredibly powerful, and there has to be a way to unlock that potential. So I just don't think anyone's quite there yet. But eventually, mana ramp becomes one of the most powerful things in the game, and it's not something that people often enjoy playing against. And again, historically, that's been the case for every single card game I've played, is that ramping mana at some point is incredibly strong.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm trying to get the webcams back. I did something wrong with the call, but hopefully they come back on. Alright, so the next question, Rick says, what is the best overall deck for a free-to-play player to craft first that can help him climb ranks, having in mind this is the only deck he'll have for some time? My initial thought would be something along the lines of aggro, but we've discussed that's not necessarily super successful, but I would say something like aggro mage. I know I've heard a lot of success stories. Anyone else have any opinions about that?
I mean, when I first got in, like, I obviously spent the money right out the gate, but looking at Archer, like the initial builds of Archer that we were working on, the deck's not super expensive. There's one legendary you only really need, and I think that's Tazcad. The other ones are, very good, but you don't need them per se to at least make the grind to legend, out of the gate. And a lot of their common and rare cards kind of help with, just provide a curve. Nimble Ally is really good. Fighters Guild Recruit's really good. You're only missing out, I think, on House Kinsman, maybe the Bone Mother's an epic, right? And then the Werebats. I think those are probably the 3 most powerful cards that you'll probably miss out on if you don't pull a lot of them, throughout the tutorial and throughout your first couple of packs. But I think those are the only cards you'll miss, and all those you can kind of pad with another 4-drop that is just as beefy per se, and you just play to curve. I think that's what's important, is that it's not necessarily the cards. Like, the cards matter a lot at the higher levels when you're in competition with other people who have those cards, but playing towards a curve and just playing intelligently and realizing what trades you need to make when you need to make them is more important than I think having the cards per se. So
good advice. Anything to add on that, Admirable?
Yeah, I actually think Control Mage you could build a pretty reasonable version of that for fairly cheap. There's not a ton of epics in the build if you really want to trim the fat on it. I don't think you need Peddlers. Manticore is probably pretty mandatory, but you can get Supreme Atromancers by leveling up. And honestly, I think Supreme Atromancer is one of the ways that more mages should be using to try to close against each other instead of fighting this weird Marok Dragon Priest Divine Fear battle that everyone seems to be fighting. Just kill them with Supreme Atromancers. And sure, it will get swept in ice storms, but you also have to consider that you can force ice storms sometimes. Maybe you can curve a little bit stronger, like Carl was talking about, trying to get a little bit more aggressive on them, curving a Golden Saint. Those are realistic possibilities. Golden Saint, again, it's a card that Mage really struggles with, and it's a card that can absolutely win you games. And Atromancer is in the same spot. Atromancer, if it goes unanswered, will win you a game. Period. And I think that some of the cheaper versions of Control Mage, like that's actually what I used to grind a Legend, was a cheap version of Control Mage. I had 3 Mana Koras, I had 2 Supreme Atromancers, and then the rest of the deck was basically just the cards I had. So I had a mix of like Telvanni, what's the 3/2 that draws a random spell? I had a mix of those and Elusive Schemers.
Yeah, the 3/1 Abyssian.
Yeah, and I was just like using the blue-white cards I had, or the Intelligence Willpower cards I had rather, and that was enough to get the job done. Just kind of playing on curve and putting stuff on the board, attacking my opponent, and then eventually getting the Atromancer.
Even just to add one more, your Crusader white deck that you played, if you don't have Rift and Pillage, you get tier, through the story mode, and then you're only missing. don't take the orb, guys. Yeah, but Alkosh and Relentless Raider, I don't think are completely necessary to what that deck's trying to do. Again, they're really good cards, but you don't need them to just kind of get in your opponent's cheeks. Yeah. But I think all the rest of the cards in that deck are either rare or common, so very easy to build out of the gate. If you just want to build a really aggressive deck to help you grind the first couple of ranks all the way to Legend. So I like that deck a lot.
So speaking of good cards, Oni had a good question. Can you guys talk about some cards you feel are underrated at the moment or possible sleeper cards? And this is something we touched on in a few past podcasts too, and it's interesting to see if our opinions have changed at all since we mentioned some in the past.
Mine has. I thought Belligerent Giant was really, really good. Now I think it's just okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was like, it's going to be something I want to play in almost every red deck, and I think I'm realizing now that it's a really good card, but I think it's just too fragile. And now that we've had the discussion with Admirable the past night and the past couple days of testing, I'm realizing it's not really doing what red necessarily wants it to do, and it's just playing a role that I think is better equipped for other things. Like, you're better off just playing something else and trying to get in rather than close with a 7/4 that can die to very easy to, things that we see a lot of. So that's a card that I think I don't like as much anymore. That I thought was a sleeper that no one was playing, and now I'm realizing it's just okay.
But what is good? Do we have any good sleeper cards? You can't just leave the people on a negative.
Yeah, Carl, do you have any good ones?
Come on.
Oh, man.
Jarl's a good one, yeah.
Jarl's great. I really don't know. Like, I like a lot of the Fate Weaver took me by surprise. I'll give it to that one. That's something that we've been playing a lot more aggressively now. I think that's something people weren't. It's a high utility card. The Control Mages could play it to just draw a card. If you draw the Prophecy, super cool. If not, it's just a +1 with a body on board. But playing it now in that Assassin deck, I think is where its hidden potential was kind of found. You play a deck with 20 plus Prophecies, and you play a Fate Weaver, and you're getting basically 2 cards. You hit another Fate Weaver, and everyone loses their mind. So it's a really good card, and I think it's something I don't think a lot of people noticed to be as good, I think, as we've found it to be in the Assassin list. And I like Ransack. I know I like Ransack a lot. I think it's just solid reach with a Prophecy. So I don't know what other decks I play it in right now, but I do like it, and I think I'll try to find spots for it later on down the road in other things that I build.
Admiral, you got any?
Yeah, I actually have 3, and 2 of them kind of tie hand in hand. I'll talk about the 2 tie hand in hand first. I think Winter's Grasp is really underappreciated. There just has to be a way to use cards that can stop your opponent's attack for a full turn to do something very powerful. And a card that I found actually works really well with it is Studium Headmaster. Getting to a late turn and playing Studium Headmaster and Winter's Grasp gets you a lot of cards and a 6/3 on board where your opponent can't just attack it, and so suddenly it requires resource investment. I am very convinced that the Wisp Mother Raid Leader, or Relentless Raider deck rather, is a strong combo deck that needs to be unlocked right now, and it's something that I've been working on all this morning, and I found some really rough patches, but I found some really strong spots as well. So I think 2 of those cards are really slept on right now. And Gladiator's Arena. I think if you're going to unlock strengths real potential, it's probably somewhere with Gladiator's Arena. Not only is it a source that's very difficult for your opponent to stop in terms of damage, but it also helps activate your runes to get you some of the extra card draw you might need. So where that ends up getting built, that's another story. But I think that Gladiator's Arena is a card that can unlock a lot of the potential for the aggressive decks that some people are looking for.
I agree. I love Gladiator's Arena. Good choices. Some of those sound like a sick combo deck that has yet to been completely revealed to the public. Looking forward to the optimal version of the Relentless Raider deck.
It's a functioning version.
Yeah.
Is where we're headed right now.
I saw it function at least twice. I can vouch for that. All right, so the last good question, I think someone just basically said, what do you think the best decks are? And it's kind of a very obvious thing. But if we had to list the 3 best decks currently on the ladder, what would they be? I'll go first because I keep making you guys answer first, and I keep having all this time to think of a good answer. I'm going to say Archer midrange, some form of a very good tempo assassin just because it beats Control Mage a lot. And my third deck would probably just have to be Control Mage at the moment. I think it's good, but I need to change the build a lot. I need to do some testing. I haven't tested it enough. But some version of Control Mage is probably really good in my opinion. Carl.
Yeah. I think those are the main two. Archer and Control Mage are still at the top of the list because I think that's what everyone's playing.
I should clarify. The Assassin Tempo that I was playing with all the reach does not have a good matchup to Control Mage, but I feel like there is a deck there that also you can switch it around to have a good Control Mage matchup. Yeah.
Right, but yeah, those 2 decks I think are just at the top because I think that's what everyone's playing. At the end of the day, when you have the majority of your player base playing certain decks, those decks get refined faster and we find the kinks and they build upon themselves quicker. So Archer and I think Control Mage, just the 2 that I see people playing the most, I think are the ones that are becoming the most powerful because that's what everyone's exploring. That's what everybody sees everybody playing. That's what everybody jumps in with. And then those decks get better and better as they continue to evolve and more players play them and find, different ways to just sort of add cards, take out cards, and make them better. And I love the Assassin build. I think it's a ton of fun. CVH didn't believe, but we made him believe, and now he thinks it's in the top 3, so shout-outs to that. I think Spell Sword's really good, too. I just don't think we have a list that can compete all around. I think the deck's got a lot of really good strong points, but I don't think it's got what it needs to take top spots yet. And I don't know what it needs to do that because I haven't really played with it all that much, but the deck just seems incredibly powerful, being able to go wide as well as that deck does, but just trying to find the right timings for it and the right cards to help you do that consistently is, I think, where that deck needs to find its power. So.
Spell Sword is a serious honorable mention for me because I really love playing it, but it just doesn't seem particularly wonderful in a meta full of like Control Mage, for example.
I just really want to play Edict of Azura. Like that card is so elegant, and every time I see it played, I'm like, man, if only that didn't cost 4 mana, it'd be a good card. It's like I actually really like the Spell Sword deck. I feel like it's just lacking late game. Like once you get past the initial assault, it's like, damn, this is hard to close the game. And that's part of it just lacking burst. I mean, it has a lot of strong cards that hit the board. It doesn't really have that burst potential, I think, that ends the game versus a lot of the control decks. Which kind of starts tying me into where my top 3 decks are. I think number 1 is Archer. I think Archer has tools to beat everything that is very strong in the metagame. I think it's got great closers available to it, and overall just has a strong game plan that scales from turn 1 to turn infinite. I will say I think Control Mage is number 2, and the reason I think Control Mage is number 2 is because most of the other decks out there right now are lacking the finishing potential that Archer has, where Archer has access to Tazcad, which is obviously a big one, and a card that I have yet to see anyone play but myself, which is Volendrung. I've used Volendrung to close a lot of games versus mages, where you play it, it buffs a 1-2 to a 5-6, and then suddenly they have to kill every single 1-2 you play for the rest of the game, and that's not an easy task for them. But I feel like Control Mage is number 2 simply because everything is lacking the burst potential to really close out the game versus Control Mage. And then that takes me to my number 3, which I do think is Assassin right now. But the build of Assassin, I think, is going to undergo a ton of change in the next couple of weeks. It's kind of gimmicky, honestly, to play so many prophecies, but it does work versus decks that are trying to be more aggressive. But as CVH said, it does struggle a lot versus Control Mage. So if you're going to make it stronger versus Control Mage, you're going to have to play cards that can close more often, which is probably going to involve using some form of charge damage with like Cliff Racer, or maybe using like Supreme Atromancer as your top end to really close out games. That's going to make you weaker versus a lot of other stuff as well, though. But I think Assassin has a lot of strong tools that are fighting the decks that we're seeing consistently win over and over again.
So I guess final, what do you think about Monk? Because I think that deck's got a lot of potential, and it's something I don't think anyone's playing. But the ability to just burst for 20 plus damage on turn 5 seems insane.
Boomslife is always playing it.
He definitely is.
Thieves' Den and Master Thieves, I think, are completely underrated.
So. Yeah, I think Monk is in a spot where the two cards to really look at for me is number one is the Master Thieves, where the potential to attack twice with stuff is really scary, and the second one that I'd probably go hand in hand with that is the Burglar. Is it Kinral Burglar?
Yeah,
Kinral.
If that gets played on turn 6 and your opponent doesn't kill it, and you have Master Thieves, that is 12 damage. And you also have now a 12 body.
18, or, draining for 12.
Yeah, you're getting 12 extra life, you're dealing 12 damage, you have a 12 body, and a Master of Thieves, which is unlocking the potential of all the rest of your Pilfer cards. So I don't necessarily think Thieves' Den is that good. I actually think that card's pretty bad. There's a lot of strong Pilfer cards. And so Master of Thieves, I think, is a card that everyone knows is strong, but finding the right cards to put with it is very difficult, because when you try a list 15 times in a row and all 15 times your deck's unrefined, and so you lose 11 of those games, you think Monk sucks, and you're really unwilling to do it afterwards. And so that's part of it that goes into the refinement process, where I think a lot of decks are unrefined, is how many people are actually sitting down right now playing 50 games of one deck versus a strong meta deck, making small changes until they get to a spot where they're winning 50% of the time. I don't think anyone's doing that right now.
Yeah, I know I'm not, and it's really tough to do when it's so easy to just like queue up right now, and due to the nature of like the hectic early meta and like the hectic, people just don't have the collection. It's so easy to just queue a deck that is pretty good, like Control Mage, Control Mage is actually kind of hard to play, but a deck like Archimage is a really good example for you just queue it up. It's so easy to just take the wins that you can get instead of why should I innovate, especially when the deck's really expensive.
That's where tournaments make a big difference, is when you have people competing for real prizes and for prestige. People want to win, and you're going to see people put in a lot of work to win tournaments if and when tournaments really get to that point.
And that seems like a fantastic place to end the Q&A. I hope these jets don't get much louder. But speaking of tournaments, this is a great time to segue into the fact that tournaments are indeed happening this very moment. Well, not this very moment, but as we literally we are all missing the tournament. But as we are making our way through this early metagame, as I mentioned in the last podcast, people are running third-party tournaments on Discord, Reddit. If you guys aren't part of the Discord, be sure to check that out. The Elder Scrolls Legends subreddit is a great place to find news and just interact with all the other fans of this game. Onia did share with me this link to the tournament, which I just posted in chat, so you guys should be seeing that come up shortly. It's the Battle for the Hist. I know nothing about this tournament except that it is happening. It is on Saturday, and I believe it's a 2-deck format, but you all should check that out because it's one of the few tournaments that are available to us right now. And I would, for one, love to see tournaments get very popular as they're being run by these great third-party organizers who just, take the initiative to run these tournaments, basically out of their own time and good-heartedness, and eventually get so popular that, Direwolf does implement a tournament mode, give us what we actually really do want down the line. So, looking forward to that. That's pretty much all we have for you. Hopefully you enjoyed the podcast with the nerfs, the examining the color wheel, the metagame talk, and the Q&A. If you missed any part of it, this will be going up on my YouTube channel, which I will also link right here shortly. Probably tomorrow it'll be up. So besides that, where can they find my lovely co-hosts, EarthP0w3R? Where can they find you, first of all?
I'm on Twitter at EarthP0w3R, EarthP0w3R, not EarthP0w3R, as some might think.
It's just as it is on screen.
As it is on screen. Check out the Twitter link. I will be posting to YouTube very regularly starting next week as soon as my new kick-ass PC comes in. So we'll finally be in a technological state to be able to bring you guys content as I've wanted to for the past month. So very excited to do that. YouTube and Twitter, that's where you can find me. I might reactivate the Facebook page, but that'll be at a later date, and then we'll go from there.
All right, Admirable, where can they find you if they don't already know?
Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, everything is ThatsAdmirable. Super easy to find.
Awesome. He usually does Hearthstone stuff, but he has been streaming this game recently as well, so, within the coming week, hopefully all three of us will be regular streamers. I know Admirable, you have to take a quick break because you're doing a lot of traveling and stuff. Totally fine. But we will keep the content coming for you here. In the meantime, be sure to check out BetweenTheLanes.net for strategy articles, strategy videos, all that stuff. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch at /IamCVH, IAMCVH. It's kind of a complicated name, just now realizing that. Hopefully you all enjoy the podcast. Feel free to follow us all. Stay tuned for the next podcast, more than likely coming 2 weeks from now. I like to try to keep these bi-weekly, but we did have a lot of news to talk about this time. So yeah, stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time, guys.
Bye.